I never believed in miracles until the day I almost died and lived to remember it. The sound of machines beeping, the smell of antiseptic, and the blur of white walls are etched in my memory like ghosts that never left. I remember the pain, the fear, the loneliness. But above all, I remember her. The nurse with kind eyes who whispered, "You're going to be okay, I promise." I didn't even know her name back then, yet her voice became the thread that kept me holding on. Years passed, life moved on, and I thought that chapter had closed forever. But fate, strange and unpredictable as it always is, had other plans. Before we dive into this emotional journey, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the mysterious ways life brings people back together, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kind of Hearts. It helps us spread more stories that remind people the world still has good souls left in IT. It was a bright afternoon in early spring when I found myself standing outside the very hospital I once fought for my life in. The world had changed, the building looked smaller now, less intimidating. I was no longer the fragile 20-year-old gasping for air after a car crash. I was 33, alive, stable, and, at least on the outside, healed. I had come to volunteer at the rehabilitation center connected to the hospital, hoping to give back some of what I once received. As I walked through the halls, every turn seemed to echo with the faint whispers of my past. The sterile smell made my stomach tighten. It took me right back to that ICU bed, to the endless nights when I couldn't move, couldn't speak, and could only stare at the ceiling tiles above me. That was when she appeared every night, her voice soft, her presence calm like the moonlight that filtered through the blinds of her name tag had read Clara M. I remember catching a glimpse of it one night when she leaned over to adjust my four. "You're doing so well," she'd say, though we both knew I was barely hanging on. When I woke up one morning and she was gone and transferred, they said, I felt a strange emptiness, as if someone had turned off a light inside me. That was 13 years ago. I shook the memories off and focused on my volunteer work. My job was simple: talk to long-term patients, especially those who felt forgotten. That's how I met Mr. Dorsey, a quiet man in his 60s recovering from a stroke. He spoke slowly, every word an effort, but he smiled often. We spent hours together, and sometimes, the nurses would stop by to thank me for keeping him company. One day, as I left his room, I heard a familiar laugh echo from the nurses' station. My heart skipped a beat. It was soft but rich, a sound that carried warmth. I froze for a moment before turning. And there she was. Clara. Her hair was shorter now, a few silver strands catching the sunlight from the window. But those eyes, gentle, deep, knowing, were exactly the same. I stood there, stunned, words caught in my throat. She turned, noticed me, and for a moment, her face was blank, as if she couldn't quite place me. Then something flickered in her eyes: recognition, disbelief, and a kind of quiet joy. "You," she whispered, walking closer. You're Aaron, aren't you?" I nodded, my heart pounding like it did all those years ago. She covered her mouth with both hands, tears forming instantly. "I can't believe it," she said softly. "You were my favorite patient." Her words hit me like a wave. The hallway blurred for a moment. I hadn't realized how deeply I'd buried those memories until they all came rushing back at once: the fear, the pain, the hope she gave me. We found a small bench near the window, sunlight spilling across the floor. She told me she had transferred to a different department shortly after I was discharged. Life had been busy, nurses rarely have time to dwell on the past. But she said she'd never forgotten the boy who tried to smile even when hooked to half a dozen machines. "I remember one night," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you were in so much pain you couldn't speak. You just looked at me and wrote on a scrap of paper, 'Thank you for not giving up on me.' I kept that note for years." I stared at her, speechless. I didn't even remember writing it. My hands were trembling slightly. "You kept it?" I asked quietly. She smiled and nodded. "It reminded me why I do what I do." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, a bird landed on the window ledge, chirping faintly as if the world itself wanted to listen. Clara told me about the patients she'd seen since then, the ones who made it, the ones who didn't, the ones who taught her that compassion doesn't always save lives but it does save hearts. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself visiting more often. Sometimes I volunteered, sometimes I just stopped by for coffee. Clara and I began talking about things far beyond hospital walls, about life, loss, and the small miracles that happen when no one's watching. One afternoon, she invited me to the hospital's memorial garden. It was a quiet place, filled with roses and small plaques engraved with the names of those who hadn't made it. The air smelled faintly of rain and lavender. We sat by the fountain, and she said softly, "You know, Aaron, when you were here, I was going through one of the hardest times of my life. My mother had just passed away, and I was thinking of quitting nursing. But then you wrote me that note. It felt like a sign from her, from life, from something bigger than both of us." Tears welled in my eyes. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I thought you were the strong one." She smiled. "Sometimes, we borrow strength from the people we care for. You gave me that." Her words sank deep into me, reshaping something inside. I had spent so many years feeling like my survival was just luck, that it didn't mean anything beyond my own recovery. But hearing her say that, knowing that my fight had given her hope, made me realize how deeply connected we all are, how acts of kindness ripple in ways we can't see. A few days later, I was scheduled to speak at a patient recovery event, a gathering where survivors share their stories to inspire others still fighting. I asked Clara if she would attend. She said yes that morning. As I stood on stage, looking out at a crowd of faces filled with pain, hope, and quiet courage, my voice trembled. I told them about the crash, the fear, the hopelessness. And then I told them about her. "I don't remember much from those months," I said, "but I remember a nurse who never let me feel like a burden. When I couldn't speak, she spoke for me. When I couldn't hope, she hoped for me. And today, she's here, sitting right there." I pointed toward Clara, whose eyes shimmered with tears. The room went silent, and for a moment, I felt the full weight of that memory, the full circle we had come. After the speech, people came up to hug us, to thank her, to share their own stories. Clara leaned over and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Aaron." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like someone who had truly lived. Weeks turned into months, and I continued volunteering, often alongside Clara. We never labeled what grew between us. Maybe it was friendship, maybe something deeper, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that we'd both found healing, in ways neither of us expected. Then, one late afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the hospital building, Clara handed me something, a small, folded piece of paper. I opened it and instantly recognized my own shaky handwriting from 13 years ago. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled, tears blurring the ink once more. "You really did keep it," I said softly. She nodded. "And now, it's yours again. Because I think you need to remember, you didn't just survive. You changed lives." That night, as I walked home, the sky painted in shades of gold and lavender, I felt something inside me settle, a quiet peace I hadn't known in years. Life is strange that way. We meet people, lose them, and sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to meet them again, not by accident, but because the universe has a way of finishing the stories it once began. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that kindness never fades and that the smallest act of care can echo for years, please like, share, and subscribe to Kind of Hearts. Every click helps us reach someone who might just need a reminder that they matter. And before we end, tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone years later who once changed your life? Or someone you wish you could thank, just one more time, because sometimes, the people who save us aren't just heroes in scrubs, they're the reminders that love, in its quietest form, is the most powerful medicine of all.